The first thing anyone noticed was how well they moved together. Not husband and wife. That pairing had not danced all season, and the absence had been noted in drawing rooms from Mayfair to Marylebone, with the particular attention that the ton reserved for marriages it suspected were failing. No, the pairing that drew every eye at Lady Marchmont's ball on the 23rd of June was Emmeline Draycott, Duchess of Everley, and Julian Radley, Lord Etchingham. And they moved as though the orchestra had written the waltz for them alone. She wore ivory silk that evening. The gown had been delivered from the modiste on Bond Street 3 weeks prior, and had hung in the dressing room at Everley House untouched until that afternoon, when her lady's maid had pressed it and laid it across the bed without being asked. Emmeline had not planned to attend. She had sent her regrets to Lady Marchmont on Monday, citing a headache that had not yet arrived but which she had fully intended to develop by Thursday evening. But the headache had not come, and the gown had been pressed, and at 7:30 she had stood before her glass in ivory silk with her hair dressed simply, a strand of seed pearls threaded through, no feathers, no ostentation, and thought, I will go. Not for him, not despite him. Simply because the evening exists, and I am permitted to occupy it. Lucian had not known she intended to come. He had arrived at Lady Marchmont's townhouse on Grosvenor Square at 9 o'clock, as was his custom, greeted the hostess with the efficient courtesy that marked all his public appearances, and taken his position near the far wall beside Sir Anthony Poole and Lord Alderton, where the conversation concerned the coming session in the House of Lords and the proposed amendments to the Corn Laws, and the thoroughly comfortable distance of 15 feet between himself and the nearest dancing couple. He had not looked for her. That was the trouble, and had been the trouble for 7 months. He did not look for her. He did not fail to look for her with any malice or intention. He simply did not think to turn his head toward the door when it opened, did not scan the room for the particular shade of dark hair that he had once, in their first weeks, found himself watching for across every crowded assembly. The looking had stopped so gradually that he could not have named the evening it ceased. It was not a decision. It was an erosion. Emmeline had arrived at 9:15. Lady Marchmont had taken both her hands at the door with the specific warmth that hostesses reserve for guests whose attendance signals something worth observing, and had said, "My dear Duchess, what a pleasure. We had quite given you up." And Emmeline had smiled and said that her headache had proved less determined than expected, and Lady Marchmont had laughed and drawn her into the room. And somewhere behind the marble columns and the blaze of 500 candles in the chandeliers, Lucian had continued his conversation about grain tariffs without turning around. Mrs. Selwyn found her first. Charlotte Selwyn had been Emmeline's closest companion since girlhood. They had shared a governess in Hertfordshire, learned watercolors from the same exasperated master, and made their curtsies at the same court presentation 7 years ago. Charlotte had married well and contentedly. And she had 3 children and a husband who brought her chocolate in the mornings, and who at this very moment was dancing with their hostess's eldest daughter out of pure neighborly good humor. Charlotte understood happy marriages from the inside, and she understood failing ones from the quality of silence that surrounded them. "You came," Charlotte said, pressing Emmeline's hand. "I came." "And does he know?" Emmeline's gaze moved across the room, not searching, not avoiding, simply passing over the landscape of the evening as one might observe a garden through a window. She found him near the west wall, tall, dark evening tailcoat, white waistcoat, cravat tied with the precision that his valet insisted upon and that Lucian himself had never cared about. He was listening to Lord Alderton with the expression of a man who was present in body and competent in conversation, and entirely unaware that anything had changed in the room behind him. I do not think it will occur to him to wonder," Emmeline said. Charlotte said nothing. There was nothing to say that Emmeline had not already understood, slowly and completely, over 7 months of mornings when she breakfasted alone, and evenings when she read alone, and afternoons when she walked in the garden at Everley Park with no one beside her but the dog and the sound of her own footsteps on the gravel. She had not wept about it. She was not a woman who wept about things she could observe clearly, and she had observed this clearly. He was not unkind. He was not unfaithful. He was not cruel. He was simply absent from his own marriage in the way that a man can be absent while sleeping in the same house and eating at the same table and occupying the same pew every Sunday at St. George's, present in form, dissolved in substance, as though the act of marrying her had completed the task, and the task, once completed, required no further attention. She had stopped reaching for him in March, not dramatically. She had not announced it, had not withdrawn with any visible alteration. She had simply ceased initiating, ceased appearing in his study with a question about the household accounts that she already knew the answer to, ceased suggesting they walk together after dinner, ceased placing her hand on his arm when they descended the stairs, because the arm was always offered out of habit and never out of want, and she had grown tired of resting her fingers on something that did not know they were there. He had not noticed. That was the fact she carried with her into Lady Marchmont's ballroom on the 23rd of June in ivory silk, with seed pearls in her hair. He had not noticed because there was nothing in his experience of their marriage to notice. Her presence and her absence occupied the same weight in his attention, and she had finally understood that this was not something she could repair by being more present or more patient or more anything at all. Lord Etchingham found her near the refreshment table. Julian Radley was everything that Lucian was not in company. Warm where Lucian was reserved, attentive where Lucian was detached, specific in his observations where Lucian dealt in generalities. He was 31, a baron of comfortable means, and he had admired Emmeline since before her marriage with the straightforward consistency of a man who knows precisely what he values and does not pretend otherwise. He had never been improper. He had never pressed. He had simply continued to see her with the quality of attention that her own husband had mislaid somewhere between the wedding breakfast and the present evening. "Duchess," he said, bowing, "I did not expect to find you here. Lady Marchmont told me you had declined." "I changed my mind, Lord Etchingham." "Then I am the immediate beneficiary of your indecision." He smiled. It was not a seductive smile. It was the smile of a man who was genuinely pleased. "May I have the honor of a dance? I believe the next is a waltz." She should have hesitated. Convention suggested that a married woman's first dance at a ball ought to be with her husband, or failing that, with a relation, or failing that, with a gentleman of long acquaintance who could not possibly be mistaken for anything but safe. Lord Etchingham was none of these things, and the Tun would note it, and she knew the Tun would note it, and she said, "You may." The music began. Lucian heard the waltz from across the room. He did not turn immediately. Lord Alderton was midway through a point about the wool duty, and Lucian was, whatever his domestic failures, a man who did not interrupt. But Sir Anthony Poole turned, and Lord Alderton turned, and something in the collective shift of attention in the room drew Lucian's gaze toward the dance floor, and he saw his wife. She was dancing with Etchingham. The observation landed without force at first. He registered it as fact. Emmeline, ivory gown, dancing, Etchingham, and turned back to Alderton. Etchingham was a decent man, a capable dancer. There was no reason for it to signify. But Alderton had stopped talking, and Sir Anthony was watching the floor with the particular stillness of a man who has identified something socially notable and is composing, even now, the precise phrasing with which he will relay it at breakfast tomorrow. Lucian looked again. They were beautiful together. That was the word that arrived unbidden and unwelcome. Beautiful. Emmeline's hand rested in Etchingham's with an ease that spoke of trust, and Etchingham held her as though she were not merely a partner in a dance, but a person whose proximity he valued, and they moved through the waltz with the fluency of two people who were paying complete attention to one another, and Lucian felt something shift behind his sternum that he could not immediately name. The waltz ended. The room applauded politely. Etchingham bowed. Emmeline curtsied. The orchestra paused, and then the next dance began, a cotillion, and Etchingham offered his hand again, and she took it. 2 dances. The Tun counted. The Tun always counted. A married woman dancing twice consecutively with a man who was not her husband was not a scandal, precisely, but it was a sentence written in a language that every person in the room could read, and the sentence said, "Something is absent, and something else is filling the space." Lucian set down his glass. He did not cross the room during the cotillion. He stood where he was and watched, and for the first time in 7 months, he saw his wife. Not the woman who occupied his breakfast table with her quiet competence, not the woman who managed his household through Mrs. Thorpe, with an efficiency he had never once acknowledged aloud. Not the woman who had greeted his tenants at the midsummer dinner and remembered every child's name and every mother's concern and had done it all without asking him to notice. He saw Emmeline, the particular way she held her chin when she was concentrating on a step, the way her lips curved when Etchingham said something that amused her, not a polite smile, but a real one, the kind that reached her eyes, the kind that Lucian realized with a cold and spreading certainty he had not seen directed at himself since winter. The cotillion ended. Etchingham bowed again. The orchestra began a second waltz. Etchingham looked at Emmeline with the question visible in his expression. He knew the rules, knew that a third dance would transform notation into declaration, and Emmeline paused, and in that pause, Lucian crossed the floor. He did not rush. He was not a man who rushed. He moved through the crowd with the unhurried authority that came with his title and his height and the particular set of his shoulders that had always, without his knowing it, caused people to step aside. But those who were watching closely, and by now half the room was watching closely, could see that his eyes did not leave his wife's face, and that his jaw was set, and that his right hand was already extended before he reached her, as though the 12 feet of parquet between them were a formality he intended to dispense with as efficiently as possible. "Duchess," he said. Emmeline turned. She regarded him with the composure that had become, over 7 months, her most practiced expression, the steady gaze, the level chin, the absolute refusal to betray surprise or pleasure or hurt. She had perfected it over breakfasts when he read his correspondence without speaking. She had refined it over suppers when he excused himself before the second course. She wore it now like the ivory silk, fitted, deliberate, and entirely her own. "Your Grace, I believe this dance is mine." Lord Etchingham stepped back. He did it gracefully, as he did everything. A bow to Emmeline, a nod to the Duke that contained no challenge and no retreat, only the clear-eyed acknowledgement of a man who understood exactly what was happening and who had always known that this particular contest was not one he was meant to win. He withdrew to the edge of the floor and did not look back, and Emmeline watched him go with something in her expression that Lucian could not read and that cost him more than anything Etchingham had done all evening. The waltz began. He took her hand. Her gloved fingers rested in his, and he was struck, absurdly, painfully, by the realization that he could not remember the last time he had held her hand, not her arm which he offered on staircases out of mechanical habit, her hand, the specific, deliberate act of closing his fingers around hers and feeling the pressure of her grip in return. She did not grip. Her hand lay in his like something lent, not given. They danced. The room watched. Lady Marchmont had positioned herself near the orchestra, with the expression of a hostess who understands that her ball has just become the most talked-about event of the week and is composing her false modesty for tomorrow's callers. Charlotte Selwyn stood near the pillar with her fan raised and her eyes bright and her heart in her throat, because she had known Emmeline since they were 10 years old, and she had never once seen her look this careful. "You came tonight," Lucian said, after 8 bars of silence. "I did. You did not tell me you intended to. You did not ask." The words were not sharp. They were not delivered as a reprimand or an accusation. They were stated with the flat precision of a woman who had simply stopped translating her own experience into terms that would be comfortable for him to hear. And the flatness was worse than any sharpness could have been. He turned her through the corner of the room. The candles in the chandelier above threw warm gold across her face, and he saw, truly saw, the strand of seed pearls in her dark hair, and the hollow at the base of her throat, and the fine lines of composure that she held like architecture, and he thought, when did I stop seeing this? When did I allow this woman to become furniture? "Emmeline," he said. She looked up at him, not with hope, not with anger, with patience, the terrible, settled patience of a woman who has waited long enough that the waiting itself has become a kind of answer. "I have been a fool," he said quietly. The orchestra played. Around them, 40 other couples turned and stepped and did not hear. I do not say that to be forgiven quickly. I say it because it is the truth, and I have left it unsaid so long that the silence has become its own offense. Yes, she said. It has. He waited for her to continue. She did not. She let the silence sit between them like the 7 months it represented, and she continued to dance with the precise, beautiful composure that she had brought to every room he had failed to occupy with her. And he understood, slowly, then completely, that she was not going to make this easy for him. She was not going to weep with relief or press her forehead to his chest or whisper that she had missed him. She had earned her composure at too high a price to surrender it for a single waltz and a late apology. I watched you dance with him, Lucian said. I know. You were... He stopped. The word beautiful was too obvious and too insufficient, and carried with it the implication that he was only seeing her clearly because another man had seen her first, and he could not bring himself to confirm what they both already knew. You were not waiting for me to notice. No, she said, I was not. When did you stop? March. The specificity of it struck him like a closed hand, not a vague, forgiving answer, not some time ago or gradually or I cannot recall. March. She had marked it. She had known the month she stopped reaching for her own husband, which meant she had been reaching, deliberately and consciously, for every month before it, and he had not once reached back. The waltz continued. He held her closer than convention permitted, not dramatically, not scandalously, but by the half-inch that the room would notice and that she would feel, and she allowed it without comment, and the allowance was not forgiveness. It was observation. She was watching to see if this was a performance for the ton or something that would survive the carriage ride home. The waltz ended. The orchestra paused. In the silence, Lucian did not release her hand. Stay, he said, dance the next with me. The room heard him. A husband asking his wife for a second consecutive dance was precisely as notable as a wife dancing twice with a man who was not her husband, and the ton recalculated its assessments with the nimble efficiency of a market adjusting to new information. Emmeline looked at him. She looked at him for 3 full seconds, long enough that he felt the weight of every breakfast he had eaten without speaking, every evening he had spent in his study while she sat alone in the drawing room, every Sunday he had occupied the pew beside her without once turning to see whether she was well or tired or sad or simply there. Very well, she said. They danced again. And again. 4 dances. The room stopped pretending not to watch. Lady Marchmont's ball would be discussed for the remainder of the season, not because of the food or the flowers or the quality of the orchestra, but because the Duke of Everley danced 4 consecutive dances with his own wife, and did not release her hand between any of them, and because the Duchess allowed it with the composure of a woman who had not yet decided what it meant. In the carriage afterward, they sat in silence. The lantern swayed. The wheels ground over cobblestones. Emmeline removed her gloves 1 finger at a time, and Lucian watched her do it, and the act of watching her do something so ordinary felt like the beginning of a penance he did not yet know the shape of. I will not ask you to forgive me tonight, he said. That is wise. I will ask you what you require of me. She folded her gloves in her lap. The seed pearls caught the lantern light. She looked at the darkened window of the carriage, at the shapes of London passing beyond the glass, and when she spoke, her voice was steady and clear and held no warmth and no coldness, only the precise temperature of a woman who has decided to say exactly what she means. I require you to be present, she said, not dutiful, not correct, present. If you sit with me at breakfast, then sit with me. If you walk with me in the garden, then walk with me. If you cannot, if your attention is occupied or your mind is elsewhere, then say so honestly, and I will occupy my own evening without resentment. But do not sit beside me in silence and call it companionship, Lucian. I have had 7 months of that, and I will not have 7 more. He nodded. The carriage turned onto Berkeley Square. The wheels were quieter here, the cobblestones smoother, and the silence between them was different now, not empty but full, like a room that has been cleared of old furniture and is waiting to be filled with something chosen with more care. He did not reach for her hand. He understood with a clarity that it arrived too late and that he intended to honor precisely because it was late, that reaching for her hand tonight would be a gesture for his comfort, not hers. And she had spent 7 months providing comfort he did not reciprocate, and the imbalance would not be corrected by a single waltz and a carriage ride and an apology delivered between dances. The next morning, he came to breakfast. He did not bring his correspondence. He did not bring the parliamentary papers that Dallow had left on his desk. He arrived at 8:30, sat across from her, and when Mrs. Thorpe brought the tea, he poured Emmeline's cup first and set it before her and said, "How do you take it?" She looked at him. "You do not know?" "No," he said, "I do not. I am asking." "A little milk, no sugar." He poured it. She drank it. They ate in silence, but it was a different silence, the silence of two people who were aware of each other across a table, who were occupying the same room deliberately and not merely simultaneously. He came to breakfast the next morning, and the morning after that. On the fourth morning, he asked her what she was reading, and she told him, a volume of natural history she had found in the library, and he asked her what she had learned, and she told him about the migration patterns of swallows. And he listened, not with the distracted courtesy of a man fulfilling an obligation, but with the stillness of someone who has discovered that the woman across the table has been speaking an entire language he never troubled to learn. On Friday, he walked with her in the garden at Everley House. The London garden was small, a rectangle of gravel paths and climbing roses that Mrs. Thorpe's predecessor had planted 12 years ago. But Emmeline had tended it since their arrival, and it was, in June, absurdly and defiantly beautiful. And Lucian realized as they walked that he had never once set foot in it. He had seen it from the window of his study. He had noted, in the abstract way he noted all household matters, that it was well kept. He had not known that his wife spent every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon directing the gardener on the pruning, and that she kept a small journal of what bloomed and when, and that the roses along the south wall were a variety she had brought from her father's garden in Hertfordshire. "These are yours?" he said, pausing before a cascade of pale pink blooms. "These are mine." He touched a petal. It was soft and faintly cool. "What are they called?" "Maiden's blush." He looked at her. She was not smiling, but the line of her mouth had softened, not into forgiveness, not yet, but into something adjacent to it. Willingness, perhaps. The willingness to watch him learn. Lord Etchingham called on Tuesday. He was announced by the footman while Lucian and Emmeline were in the drawing room, Lucian reading, Emmeline working at her embroidery frame, the afternoon light falling between them through tall windows. Lucian looked up at the name and felt the same sharp thing move behind his sternum that he had felt at the ball, but he did not speak. He watched Emmeline set aside her needle and rise and greet Lord Etchingham with the warmth of a woman receiving a friend, because that is what Etchingham was, a friend. And Lucian understood, watching from his chair with his book forgotten in his lap, that the threat Etchingham posed was not that he might take Emmeline from him. The threat was that Etchingham demonstrated, every time he entered a room, what attentive admiration looked like, and that Lucian had provided so little of it that the contrast was visible from across a drawing room. Etchingham stayed for 20 minutes. He spoke to Emmeline about a concert at the Hanover Square Rooms that she might enjoy. He inquired after her garden. He did not address the Duke with any animosity. He addressed him with the cordial formality of a man who understood his position and did not covet what was not his, but who also did not intend to pretend that the Duchess was anything less than remarkable. When he left, Emmeline returned to her embroidery. Lucian closed his book. "He admires you," Lucian said. "Yes." "He has admired you for some time." "Yes." "I was not aware." Emmeline threaded her needle. "You were not aware of a great many things, Lucian. That is not Lord Etchingham's failing." The honesty of it winded him. He sat in the afternoon light with the book closed in his lap and understood that she was right, and that the understanding was not sufficient, and that sufficiency would require not one morning or one walk or one overdue breakfast, but the steady, daily, unremarkable work of being present in a marriage he had been sleepwalking through since autumn. He did the work. He came to breakfast every morning. He walked with her 3 times a week. He learned that she took a little milk and no sugar, and that she preferred the library to the drawing room on cold days, and that she wrote to her sister in Northamptonshire every Thursday, and that she had read every volume of natural history in his library and had begun requesting new ones from Hatchard's, and that the bookseller's boy knew her by name and always asked after her roses. He learned that she had been lonely. She did not say the word. She did not need to. He saw it in the speed with which she looked up when he entered a room, Not eagerly, not gratefully, but with the reflexive alertness of a woman who had spent so long in empty rooms that the sound of a footstep still surprised her. He saw it in the letters she wrote to her sister, long, detailed, full of observations about London and the garden and the weather, letters that should have been conversations with a husband, redirected onto paper because the husband had made himself unavailable. In July, he attended the sitting of the House of Lords on the Tuesday, as he always did, but he returned earlier than usual and found her in the garden with the journal open on her lap, recording the first bloom of the damask roses. He sat beside her on the stone bench without announcement. She did not look up immediately. When she did, her expression was careful, still careful, always careful, but the carefulness had thinned, like ice in April, like a window opened 1 inch further each week. "You are home early," she said. "The debate concluded. I did not stay for the committee." "You always stay for the committee." "I do not always have a reason to come home." She closed the journal. She looked at him for a long time. The garden was quiet. Bees in the roses, the distant clatter of a carriage on the square, the particular muffled quality of a London afternoon in high summer. And then she did something she had not done since February. She placed her hand on his arm. Not on the arm he offered out of habit on staircases, on his forearm where it rested on his knee, with the deliberate pressure of a woman who was choosing, consciously and without obligation, to touch her husband. He covered her hand with his. He held it carefully, as one holds something returned that one does not deserve to have back. And they sat in the garden in the July heat with the damask roses blooming around them and did not speak, because the silence between them had finally become the kind that does not need to be filled. At Lady Marchmont's autumn ball in October, the same rooms, the same chandeliers, 500 candles blazing above the same parquet floor, they arrived together. Emmeline wore deep blue silk, sapphires at her throat that had belonged to his grandmother and that he had given her that morning, not as a gift but as an acknowledgement. "These are yours, they were always meant to be yours. I simply failed to offer them at the proper time." Lord Etchingham was there. He bowed to the Duchess with his usual warmth and asked if she might save him a dance, and Emmeline smiled, the real smile, the one that reached her eyes, and said that she would, and Lucian felt the sharp thing move behind his sternum again and recognized it now for what it was, not jealousy, gratitude. Etchingham had been the mirror held up in a ballroom on a June evening, and the reflection had been unbearable, and the unbearableness had been the beginning of everything that came after. Emmeline danced one dance with Etchingham, a quadrille. They moved well together, as they always had, and the room noted it with considerably less interest than it had in June, because the room had also noted the 4 dances the Duchess had shared with her husband before the quadrille, and the way the Duke's hand had rested on the small of her back as they left the floor, and the way she had leaned, so slightly that only Charlotte Selwyn saw it clearly, into the pressure of his palm. Mrs. Thorpe noticed the change at Everley House before anyone announced it. She had served 3 duchesses, and she knew the temperature of a household the way a farmer knows weather, by signs invisible to anyone who does not spend their life attending to them. The flowers in the Duchess's sitting room, which had been replaced with efficient regularity all winter, now appeared in the Duke's study as well. The breakfast table, which had been laid for 1 since November and for 2 since June, was now laid with both chairs angled toward the window, rather than facing each other across the table's width, as though the 2 people who sat in them preferred proximity to formality. The library fire, which had burned for the Duchess alone through the cold months, was now banked later, because the Duke sat with her there in the evenings reading. "She has forgiven him, then," Charlotte said to Emmeline over tea in December, when the first snow had fallen and the garden was white and still. "Forgiven is not the word." "What is the word?" Emmeline considered. She held her cup, a little milk, no sugar, and Lucian now knew this the way he knew the day of the week, and looked at the snow through the window and said, "He is learning. I am letting him learn. Those are different things." "And Etchingham?" "Lord Etchingham is a good man. He was kind to me when kindness was in short supply, and I will always be grateful for it, and he knows that, and he has never asked for anything more. That is why he is a good man." Their daughter was born the following autumn. They called her Juliana, a name that meant nothing to the ton and everything to the 2 people who chose it, and if Lord Etchingham noticed the echo when he paid his respects at the christening, he said nothing, and his smile as he looked down at the child in the Duchess's arms was precisely as warm and uncomplicated as it had always been. Lucian stood beside Emmeline in the chapel and held her hand, her bare hand without gloves, because it was a Tuesday afternoon and the christening was private and small, and the hand was offered freely, not rested on his arm out of habit, but placed in his palm because she wanted it there. And he closed his fingers around it and understood that this ordinary, unremarkable daily act of being present was the whole of it. Not a grand gesture, not a public declaration. The whole of love was a poured cup of tea and a morning spent in the same room and a hand offered without being asked. Years later, at another ball, Juliana, 3 years old and asleep at home with Mrs. Thorpe, a second child expected in the spring. Emmeline danced with Lucian, and afterward, standing at the edge of the floor with champagne they did not drink, she said, "Do you remember Lady Marchmont's ball?" "Which one?" "The first one, the June one." "I remember it. You cut in after one song." "It was 2. She looked at him. "It was 1. "I'm quite certain it was 2, Emmeline. I counted." "You did not count. You were talking to Lord Alderton about grain tariffs." "I was watching you over Lord Alderton's left shoulder while appearing to discuss grain tariffs. It was 2 dances, a waltz and a cotillion." She smiled, the real smile. "Very well, it was 2, but you only needed 1. He set down his glass. He offered his hand. She took it. And in the candlelight, in the noise and heat and press of another season's final ball, the Duke of Everley danced with his wife, and the room did not remark upon it, because by now there was nothing remarkable about it at all. That was the whole victory. That was everything. They arrive here like a step taken before the music ends, whenever they are ready.